In 1983, one of the most prestigious, centuries-old industries in human history was standing on the absolute brink of total extinction. For more than 300 years, the phrase Swiss-made was the undisputed global gold standard of engineering, luxury, and prestige. Switzerland controlled over 50% of the world's watch market, employing 90,000 master craftsmen across picturesque alpine valleys who spent lifetimes assembling micro-gears, balance springs, and jewel bearings by hand. Then came the digital revolution, and the entire empire collapsed in slow motion. Japanese tech companies led by Seiko, Citizen, and Casio introduced quartz electronic wristwatches, battery-powered microchips that used vibrating quartz crystals to tell time with robotic precision. Unlike fragile mechanical gears, quartz watches never lost a second, never needed winding, and cost a fraction of the price to manufacture at scale. Almost overnight, mechanical timekeeping was rendered completely obsolete. What followed was known in Switzerland as the Quartz Crisis, a brutal economic bloodbath that wiped out over 1,000 Swiss watchmakers and destroyed 2/3 of the country's watchmaking workforce. Historic brands like Omega, Tissot, and Longines were bleeding millions of dollars, drowning in bank debt, and facing imminent liquidation. Swiss banks were preparing to sell off Switzerland's proudest national heritage to Asian conglomerates for scrap metal. Then, a defiant Lebanese-Swiss management consultant named Nicolas Hayek entered the scene with a radical, counterintuitive rescue plan. Instead of surrendering or retreating further into ultra-expensive niche luxury, Hayek launched a secret $500 million counterattack. He created a colorful, $50 plastic quartz watch called Swatch, short for second watch. It was an outrageous industrial gamble that defied every sacred tradition of Swiss horology. Yet, against all odds, that little plastic watch became an explosive multi-billion-dollar pop culture phenomenon, generated an ocean of cash flow, subsidized legendary luxury houses, and orchestrated the greatest corporate turnaround in modern industrial history. This is the incredible true story of the $500 million strategy that saved the Swiss watch industry from total extinction. To understand why the Swiss were so completely blindsided, we have to look back at the golden age of mechanical horology in the mid-20th century. Following the end of the Second World War, Swiss watch manufacturers held a near-total global monopoly. Because Switzerland had remained neutral, its factories, tooling, and master watchmakers were completely intact, while competing industrial nations had spent years converting their manufacturing lines to military hardware. By the 1960s, Swiss workshops produced nearly 1 out of every 2 watches sold on Earth. The industry was fragmented into hundreds of small, family-owned workshops spread across the Jura Mountains. Watchmaking was treated not as mass manufacturing, but as a sacred art form passed down from father to son. Master artisans took immense pride in the meticulous finishing of metallic escapements, tiny tourbillons, and hand-polished bevels. Precision was the ultimate selling point. The more accurate your mechanical movement was, the more money you could charge. However, hidden inside that supreme mastery was a fatal assumption. The Swiss believed that mechanical precision was an irreplaceable art that could never be automated or matched by electronics. Ironically, it was Swiss engineers themselves who helped invent the very technology that would nearly destroy them. In the late 1960s, Swiss research laboratories developed early electronic quartz movements. But the conservative Swiss watch barons dismissed the technology as a cheap electronic novelty with no soul, refusing to mass-produce it. Across the Pacific Ocean, Japanese electronics giants saw the future with crystal clarity. On Christmas Day in 1969, Seiko shocked the world by releasing the Seiko Astron, the world's first commercial quartz wristwatch. Inside the Astron, an electric current from a tiny battery passed through a miniature quartz crystal tuning fork, causing it to vibrate precisely 32,768 times per second. An integrated microchip counted those vibrations, driving a step motor with flawless mechanical accuracy. The Astron was 20 times more accurate than the finest handcrafted Swiss chronometer on the market. At first, Swiss watchmakers scoffed, pointing out that early quartz watches were expensive. But they failed to comprehend the exponential economics of digital technology and Moore's law. Throughout the 1970s, Japanese manufacturers perfected automated mass production lines, silicon microchip fabrication, and liquid crystal digital displays. Within a few short years, the retail price of a precision quartz watch plummeted from $1,000 down to $10, and eventually to just $5. For the average consumer, the choice was obvious. Why spend $500 on a delicate Swiss mechanical watch that gained or lost seconds every day, when you could spend $20 at a department store for a digital watch that told perfect time, had a built-in stopwatch, and never required expensive servicing? The shift in consumer behavior was seismic and merciless. Between 1970 and 1983, the Swiss watchmaking industry was completely pulverized. The total number of Swiss watch manufacturers plunged from 1,600 down to barely 600. Over 60,000 skilled watchmakers lost their jobs. Famous centuries-old brands vanished into bankruptcy overnight, while others were sold for pennies to survive. Switzerland's two largest watchmaking conglomerates, a Swag, which controlled component and movement manufacturing, and SSIH, which owned iconic heritage brands like Omega and Tissot, accumulated hundreds of millions of Swiss francs in catastrophic bank debt. The factories were running at massive losses, component warehouses were overflowing with unsold mechanical movements, and the companies were burning through cash reserves at an alarming speed. By 1981, the crisis reached a fatal boiling point. The consortium of Swiss creditor banks that had financed the industry's ballooning debts lost all patience. The bankers concluded that mechanical watchmaking was dead and that Switzerland could never compete against Asian automated electronics factories. The banks drew up a liquidation strategy: sell off the crown jewels, dismantle the manufacturing infrastructure, and sell the prestigious brand name of Omega and its tooling to a Japanese bidder who had offered a multi-million-dollar buyout. Before signing the final liquidation orders, the banks hired Nicolas Hayek, the head of a top Swiss management consulting firm, to conduct an independent operational audit and oversee the orderly sell-off. Nicolas Hayek was not a traditional watchmaker. He was a brilliant, outspoken industrial strategist who understood global manufacturing, brand psychology, and marketing theater. Hayek toured the decaying Alpine factories, studied the balance sheets, and came to an astonishing conclusion that terrified the conservative bankers. Hayek told the banks that liquidating the industry and selling Omega to foreign competitors would be an act of national suicide. He argued that if Switzerland surrendered its industrial manufacturing base, it would permanently destroy the centuries-old cultural identity of the nation. Hayek presented a daring, $500 million turnaround proposal. First, he demanded the immediate merger of the two dying conglomerates, a Swag and SSIH, into a single unified industrial titan called SMH, which would later be renamed the Swatch Group. Second, Hayek personally organized a syndicate of Swiss private investors to inject fresh capital, buying a controlling majority stake in a merged company and installing himself as CEO and chairman. Third, and most shockingly, Hayek announced that instead of retreating into ultra-expensive luxury watches for millionaires, Switzerland had to take the fight directly to Japan in the low-cost mass consumer market. To traditional Swiss watchmakers, Hayek's plan sounded completely insane. How could high-wage Swiss factories possibly compete against automated Asian tech factories in selling a cheap $20 watch? The answer lay in a top-secret skunk works engineering project hidden inside the ETA Movement manufacturing subsidiary, led by visionary engineers Elmar Mach, Jacques Muller, and Ernst Thonk. The engineers realized that if you tried to build a quartz watch using traditional watchmaking methods, you would always lose on labor costs. A standard mechanical wristwatch was an intricate puzzle containing over 90 individual components that had to be painstakingly hand-assembled, lubricated, and adjusted inside a metallic case. The Swiss engineering team decided to tear up the entire rulebook of horology. Instead of assembling parts inside a separate steel case, They turned the plastic watch casing itself into the base plate for the movement. They radically re-engineered the inner mechanism, slashing the total number of moving parts from 91 down to exactly 51. The entire internal module was welded together using automated ultrasonic technology and sealed permanently inside a single piece of injection-molded plastic. Because the plastic case was completely hermetically sealed, it was shockproof, water-resistant, and entirely immune to dust and moisture. Most importantly, the entire assembly line was 100% automated by advanced robotics. The production cost of each watch dropped by an astounding 80%. Switzerland finally had a quartz watch that was cheaper, tougher, and more precise than almost anything coming out of Asia. On March 1st, 1983, Hayek unveiled the new creation in Zurich under the name Swatch. Priced at an ultra-accessible 39 Swiss francs, about $30 to $40, the Swatch was an immediate engineering marvel. However, Hayek knew that brilliant engineering alone would not be enough to win. If Swatch was marketed merely as a cheap digital timekeeping device, it would remain a boring commodity in an already crowded electronic market. So Hayek unleashed one of the greatest marketing pivots in modern business history. He declared that the Swatch was not a precision instrument designed to tell time. It was an emotional fashion accessory, a piece of wearable pop art, and an expression of personal identity. The name Swatch stood for second watch, the idea that you didn't just own one expensive heirloom timepiece for life, but multiple fun, colorful watches that you match with different outfits, seasons, and moods. Hayek threw out traditional, sterile watch marketing. Instead of stuffy advertisements in country club magazines, Swatch launched aggressive, vibrant advertising campaigns that tapped directly into the booming youth culture of the 1980s. Swatch sponsored extreme sports, breakdancing championships, and street art exhibitions. The company partnered with legendary contemporary pop artists like Keith Haring, Kiki Picasso, and Jean-Michel Basquiat to design limited edition, numbered artistic watches that instantly turned plastic timepieces into highly coveted collector's items. In one famous publicity stunt in Frankfurt, Hayek suspended a giant, 500-foot-long Swatch watch from the side of a major commercial skyscraper, dominating the city skyline. The consumer response was an explosive global frenzy. In its first year, Swatch sold over 1 million units. By 1984, sales skyrocketed past 2.5 million. Within 5 years, over 50 million Swatch watches were wrapped around wrists from New York to Tokyo. People didn't buy just one Swatch, they bought dozens. Teenagers wore 2 or 3 Swatches on a single wrist, and collectors traded rare artist editions at major auction houses for thousands of dollars. The plastic watch became an unstoppable commercial cash machine. More importantly, Hayek executed the master financial strategy behind the brand. He didn't use the colossal profits from Swatch just to enrich shareholders. He used the massive cash flow generated by $40 plastic watches to secretly finance, protect, and modernize Switzerland's dying luxury mechanical heritage brands. The profits from Swatch subsidized the research, development, and revival of historic high-end horology giants under the Swatch Group umbrella, including Omega, Longines, Breguet, Blancpain, and Tissot. By stabilizing the industrial manufacturing base through ETA component factories, Hayek preserved the critical tooling, machinery, and artisan supply chains that the entire luxury watch sector needed to survive. Behind that financial shield, mechanical watchmaking underwent a glorious renaissance. Stripped of the practical burden of being everyday timekeeping tools, mechanical watches were successfully repositioned to global consumers as ultimate symbols of craftsmanship, mechanical poetry, timeless luxury, and elite status. Brands like Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and Omega experienced a historic resurgence, selling complex mechanical chronographs for tens of thousands of dollars to an eager global luxury market. By the time Nicolas Hayek passed away, the Swatch Group had grown into the largest watchmaking corporation on planet Earth, generating billions in annual revenue and securing the Swiss watchmaking industry's dominance for generations to come. The revival of the Swiss watch industry stands as one of the most brilliant masterclasses in corporate turnaround history. It proved that when a technological disruption destroys your core product's original utility, survival doesn't come from denying the future or begging for government bailouts. Survival comes from having the courage to reinvent your production economics, change the fundamental meaning of your brand, and turn a deadly competitive threat into your greatest marketing triumph. If Nicolas Hayek had followed the bank's advice and liquidated the Swiss factories in 1981, would mechanical watches still exist outside of museum exhibits today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the wildest fortunes, biggest blunders, and dramatic turnarounds in business history.